A 240-meter ship does not simply disappear from the strategic equation quietly, but that is precisely what happened to Iran's most ambitious naval asset in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury, and the silence surrounding that moment may tell us more about American strategic intent than any official statement has. The vessel in question was the Shahid Bagheri, Iran's recently commissioned drone and helicopter carrier, confirmed destroyed by US Central Command during strikes on March 2, 2026. For context on just how significant this target was, the ship was the result of a 2022 to 2024 conversion of a commercial container ship, to which an angled flight deck with a ski jump ramp was added, in the manner of light aircraft carriers. It was the first full-service UAV carrier of the IRGC Navy, and it had been in active service for less than 4 weeks. That detail alone reframes the entire story. This was not an aging vessel nearing the end of its operational life. It was a brand new platform, one that Iran had spent years and enormous resources developing, a centerpiece of what Tehran believed was a generational leap in maritime power projection, and it was neutralized within hours of the first strike. The question that matters now is not simply what happened to the ship. The question is what the decision to target it first, and so decisively, reveals about how American planners framed this campaign from the beginning, and what it means for the regional balance of maritime power going forward. To understand why the Shahid Bagheri represented such a significant investment for Iran, you have to understand what it was built to do. The vessel was designed to provide the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy with a mobile sea base capable of extended deployments, incorporating a diverse mix of unmanned aerial vehicles and rotary wing aircraft, including Jalas 313 unmanned jets, Mohajer 6 armed UAVs, a Babylon 3 reconnaissance drones, Homer vertical takeoff drones, Shahid 136 loitering munitions, and multiple helicopter variants. If you translate that out of technical language, what Iran had built was a floating command and launch platform that could theoretically operate independently of shore-based infrastructure for extended periods, carrying enough drone capacity to generate meaningful pressure across a significant maritime radius. Iranian sources indicated a capacity of up to 60 UAVs and internal storage for approximately 30 fast attack craft deployable through side openings, aligning with swarm and hit-and-run maritime tactics. Armament included anti-ship cruise missiles, short-range air defense launchers, autocannons, and additional weapons systems. The ship also incorporated electronic warfare equipment, signals intelligence systems, and command and control facilities intended to coordinate drone sorties, missile launches, and surface maneuver elements during extended deployments. In short, this was not a support vessel in the traditional sense. It was a self-contained mobile warfare platform. It was the only ship with a ski jump ramp in the Islamic Republic's naval fleet, a feature that enables more and larger drones to launch compared to other IRGC-N and IRN vessels. IRGC officials previously claimed that the carrier could conduct missions for up to a year without refueling, which would have enabled the IRGC-N to significantly extend its operational range and capacity. That last point deserves emphasis. A naval platform capable of operating for 12 months without returning to port is not a coastal defense asset. It is a power projection tool, one designed to allow Iran to exert influence far beyond the immediate Persian Gulf theater. Tehran was not building a defensive buffer, it was building reach. That context makes the timing of the strike all the more revealing. The Shahid Bagheri was reportedly struck within hours of launching Operation Epic Fury. This was not an afterthought or a secondary target in a larger air campaign. According to available information, it was among the highest priority assets identified for neutralization in the opening phase of the operation. The decision to prioritize it above other targets, including numerous shore-based missile systems, anti-ship batteries, and command facilities, signals that American planners viewed the vessel's mobile sea-basing capability as a distinct and urgent threat that needed to be addressed before it could be repositioned or dispersed. That distinction matters enormously because it tells you something about how the operational picture was framed well before the first strike was launched. Stationary targets can be tracked, monitored, and struck on a defined timeline. Mobile platforms introduce uncertainty. A drone carrier capable of operating independently for a year once at sea becomes significantly harder to locate, track, and engage with confidence. The fact that the Shahid Bagheri was struck at its berthing in Bandar Abbas before it had any opportunity to disperse or relocate suggests the operation was designed with a very specific sequencing logic. Remove the mobile threat before it becomes a moving target. Drone carrier IRIS Shahid Bagheri was attacked by US forces at its berthing in Bandar Abbas within the initial hours of epic fury, according to a post from CENTCOM. The US command also said the strikes have targeted Iran's small submarine fleet, composed of numerous midget submarines and a handful of Russian Kilo-class attack boats. The scope of what was being targeted simultaneously helps clarify what planners were trying to achieve. This was not a punitive action aimed at sending a signal. It was a systematic effort to degrade Iran's capacity to threaten maritime traffic across multiple domains, surface, subsurface and aerial, within a compressed operational window. The Shahid Bagheri was not the only significant vessel targeted. Satellite imagery analysis also revealed the destruction of the IRIS Makran, Iran's first forward base ship, which was struck while moored at Bandar Abbas. The Makran, originally a Japanese-built Aframax crude oil tanker, completed in 2010, had been converted into a military vessel capable of supporting helicopter operations and serving as a mothership for Special Operations Forces. Together, the Shahid Bagheri and the Makran represented the two most significant nodes of Iran's maritime forward-basing capability. Removing both simultaneously, in the opening hours of the campaign, effectively dismantled Iran's ability to project organized naval power beyond its immediate coastal perimeter. Satellite imagery, analyzed by BBC Verify, identified a damaged vessel about 230 meters long, consistent with a Makran-class forward base ship operated by the Iranian Navy. The Makran, a converted tanker measuring about 228 meters, is also a mobile maritime base and helicopter carrier capable of deploying up to 5 helicopters and fast attack boats. Both ships shared a common architectural logic: commercial vessels repurposed as military platforms, trading traditional warship survivability for capacity and reach. In theory, this approach allowed Iran to develop significant capability at lower cost. In practice, as this operation demonstrated, it introduced a critical vulnerability that precision targeting was specifically designed to exploit. Strategically, the strike underscores the vulnerability of converted commercial vessels employed as military assets when operating within reach of precision-guided munitions and long-range strike systems. Without a mobile sea base such as the Shahid Bagheri, coordination of wide-area drone swarms and integration of ISR with offshore maneuver elements becomes more complex and geographically constrained. That is a significant strategic shift, and it is worth pausing to absorb what it means. Iran had spent years developing an asymmetric naval doctrine centered on the idea that swarm tactics, drone coordination, and distributed maritime pressure could offset the firepower advantages of more conventionally organized naval forces. The Shahid Bagheri was the command and launch hub around which that doctrine was supposed to operate at extended range. Without it, Iran's remaining maritime assets are forced back toward a more geographically limited posture, dependent on shore-based support, and constrained in their ability to sustain coordinated operations across a wide area. This does not eliminate Iran's maritime threat profile entirely. Coastal missile batteries, fast attack craft, submarine assets, and mine-laying capability all remain factors, though according to current assessments, each of these has also faced significant operational pressure. As of March 10th, US forces had also destroyed 16 mine-laying vessels that threatened the Strait of Hormuz, with reported totals reaching more than 30 by mid-March. Mine warfare was perhaps the most strategically asymmetric tool in Iran's maritime arsenal, capable of disrupting or closing the Strait of Hormuz without requiring a direct naval engagement. The prioritization of mine-laying vessels as targets reflects the same strategic logic that drove the early strike on the Shahid Bagheri: identify the instruments of strategic disruption and address them before they can be employed. The Strait of Hormuz sits at the center of every calculation in this story. Around 20% of global oil supplies transit the Strait of Hormuz on any given day, and Iran has threatened repeatedly to close the strait with mines or missiles if a major US attack occurs. That threat was not rhetorical. It was grounded in a real operational capability that Iran had developed over decades, precisely for this contingency. The decision to neutralize the assets most central to that capability, including the Shahid Bagheri, the Makran, mine-laying vessels, and shore-based naval infrastructure, reflects a deliberate effort to address the Hormuz threat at its source, rather than manage the consequences of a partial closure after the fact. The prioritization also sought to preserve freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, a vital maritime choke point connecting the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. which ordinarily enables the flow of about 20% of global oil and liquefied natural gas shipments. Following the launch of the operation, traffic through the Strait dropped 85% due to increased tensions, with Iran's Revolutionary Guards commander declaring the Strait closed and threatening passing ships. That disruption, even if temporary, generated immediate ripple effects. Oil prices jumped roughly 10% to approximately $80 per barrel in the immediate period following the operation's launch, a figure that likely represents only a partial reflection of the full market anxiety generated by uncertainty around Hormuz transit. The broader economic exposure is significant. Countries across Asia, including major importers whose energy security depends heavily on Persian Gulf supplies, were forced to reassess supply chain assumptions almost overnight. In South Korea's case, the country maintains strategic stockpiling bases holding over 100 million barrels of crude, with approximately 52 days' worth of annual LNG demand in storage. That buffer provides short-term resilience, but it is exactly that, short-term. A prolonged disruption to Hormuz transit would generate compounding pressure on economies with limited alternative supply routes, transforming what began as a targeted military operation into a global economic stress event. That economic dimension is inseparable from the geopolitical dimensions of the campaign, and it explains why the Shahid Bagheri and vessels like it were treated as such high-priority targets. The threat Iran could credibly pose to Hormuz was not primarily a direct military threat to US Navy assets. American naval power in the region, anchored by carrier strike groups and supported by advanced air defense systems, is capable of absorbing or deflecting most of what Iran could bring to bear in a direct engagement. The real leverage Iran possessed was economic. Its ability to create uncertainty, to make insurance firms price up risk, to slow or halt tanker traffic, to generate price spikes that hurt economies far removed from the conflict zone. That was the strategic instrument that planners needed to address. By dismantling the forward-basing capability that would have allowed Iran to sustain coordinated maritime pressure at range, including the drone-carrying and mine-laying capacity that made the Hormuz threat credible, the operation attempted to reduce that economic leverage before it could be fully exercised. Whether that objective was achieved, or to what degree, remains a matter of assessment rather than certainty. Iran still possesses a limited submarine force and coastal missile launchers and small irregular craft. These assets are reduced relative to the fleet that existed at the campaign's start, but they retain some residual capacity for disruption. The internal dynamics within Iran's military and political structures add another layer of complexity to the picture. One of the most significant political developments of the conflict's first week was a visible split between Iran's civilian presidency and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. President Pezeshkian issued an apology to Gulf states, pledging that Iran would halt attacks on neighbors unless strikes were first launched from their territory. Hours later, IRGC-aligned Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf publicly reversed the commitment, stating Gulf nations hosting US military bases would remain targets. That contradiction is not merely a public relations problem, it reveals a structural challenge that complicates any diplomatic pathway towards stabilization. The command fragmentation reduces the probability of a negotiated off-ramp, as any interlocutor faces the problem that civilian commitments cannot bind the IRGC. This is a well-documented feature of Iran's dual-track governance structure, but it becomes acutely problematic in a conflict environment where the consequences of miscommunication or contradictory signaling can extend well beyond the immediate theater. If Iran's civilian leadership cannot credibly commit on behalf of its military structures, then any diplomatic framework built on civilian assurances operates on uncertain foundations. The broader international response has reflected the same mixture of concern and strategic calculation that characterizes most major power reactions to regional conflicts with global economic implications. Iran's retaliatory posture is strengthened by its trilateral strategic pact with China and Russia, signed in January 2026. The agreement provides diplomatic cover, intelligence cooperation, economic resilience, and technological support. China has reportedly provided satellite imagery and early warning data on US force deployments, while Chinese surveillance vessels have monitored US naval operations in the region. Russia has agreed to rebuild Iran's air defense systems. These developments suggest that the conflict's long-term strategic consequences extend beyond the immediate military balance and into the architecture of great power competition. China has both the economic leverage over Iran and the strategic interest in a ceasefire that no other major power combines. A Chinese-mediated framework is considered by regional analysts as potentially the most viable near-term diplomatic pathway. China's interest in stabilization is not sentimental, it is structural. As the world's largest oil importer and a country that routes a significant share of its energy supply through the Strait of Hormuz, Beijing has direct and immediate economic exposure to any sustained disruption. That exposure gives China a genuine incentive to pursue de-escalation, even as its strategic alignment with Iran creates competing pressures. How Beijing manages that tension in the coming weeks will be one of the most consequential diplomatic variables in the entire situation. The diplomatic backdrop to the operation itself adds a layer of complexity that analysts continue to assess. Just before the strikes began, on the 27th of February 2026, Oman's foreign minister said a breakthrough had been reached, and Iran had agreed both to never stockpile enriched uranium and to full verification by the IAEA. Furthermore, Iran had agreed to irreversibly downgrade its current enriched uranium to the lowest level possible. Talks were expected to resume on March 2nd. That timeline is striking. The strikes began on February 28th. Talks were scheduled to resume on March 2nd. The gap between those two dates contains the entire opening phase of the military operation, including the strikes on the Shahid Bagheri. Iran's delegate to the United Nations said that Iran had been participating in dialogue toward a sustainable agreement and described the operation as aggression that satisfies none of the criteria of lawful self-defense. The UN Secretary-General, who had condemned the strikes, urged all parties to return immediately to the negotiating table, expressing deep regret that the opportunity for diplomacy had been squandered. Diplomatic observers and regional governments have raised questions about the sequencing of military action relative to ongoing negotiations, and those questions have not been resolved by official statements from Washington. The strategic rationale for proceeding while diplomatic channels remained active is a subject of ongoing debate. Reasonable people can disagree about whether diplomatic alternatives were fully exhausted. The Omani-mediated negotiations in February showed real progress, and there are legitimate questions about whether Washington walked away too soon. At the same time, analysts who support the military approach argue that the campaign's objectives, degrading Iran's missile infrastructure, nuclear development capacity, and naval power projection capability, could only be achieved through direct action rather than through negotiated commitments whose verification and durability remained uncertain. What is observable, separate from the debate over strategic rationale, is the cumulative effect on Iran's maritime posture. CENTCOM Admiral Brad Cooper stated that the United States had destroyed over 100 Iranian naval vessels by mid-March, and US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth declared the Iranian Navy to be, in his assessment, combat ineffective. Those figures, if accurate according to available reporting, represent a transformation of the regional naval balance that will not be reversed quickly. The Shahid Bagheri alone took approximately 2 years to convert and commission. Rebuilding comparable capability from scratch would require time, resources, and access to components that current sanctions regimes and military pressure may significantly constrain. At the theater level, the destruction or disabling of Iranian naval vessels in the Gulf of Oman alters the local surface force balance and reduces Tehran's ability to contest control of approaches to the Strait of Hormuz using larger hulls capable of sustained operations. The elimination of sea-based aviation and forward support ships narrows Iran's maritime options toward asymmetric tactics centered on speedboats, mines, and land-based missiles. That shift is strategically significant, though it does not eliminate Iran's ability to generate disruption entirely. Asymmetric maritime tactics can be highly effective even when larger naval assets have been removed from the equation. The persistence of small boat harassment, coastal missile threats, and any remaining mine-laying capacity means the Strait of Hormuz will remain a zone of elevated risk for commercial shipping for the foreseeable future. Regardless of what the current operational picture looks like, the psychological dimension of the Shahid Bagheri's fate should not be dismissed. The vessel was commissioned on February 6, 2025, celebrated in Iranian state media as a symbol of indigenous military capability and naval ambition. Footage broadcast by Iranian state TV on the inauguration showed helicopters and drones on the warship's flight deck, and IRGC Chief General Hossein Salami said at the ceremony that the warship can travel independently at sea for up to 1 year. That ceremony was a very public statement of Iranian strategic intent and confidence. The vessel's neutralization, just weeks later, at the beginning of a broader operation, sends a different kind of signal, that the investment of years and significant national resources into a platform designed to project power can be negated within hours by an adversary with precision strike capability and real-time intelligence. That signal reaches beyond Iran. It is observed by every regional actor and every military planner assessing the viability of similar conversion programs or asymmetric naval approaches. The lesson being drawn in various capitals right now is that converted commercial vessels, regardless of how extensively they are modified, carry inherent limitations when operating against adversaries with advanced targeting and strike capabilities. The Shahid Bagheri's designers worked within real constraints: cost, available shipbuilding capacity, the baseline survivability of a commercial hull. Those constraints produced a platform with impressive capacity but significant vulnerability, a trade-off that precision-guided munitions exploited with efficiency. What happens next depends on variables that are still in motion. The Strait of Hormuz crisis continues to evolve, with shipping traffic, insurance markets, and diplomatic channels all subject to rapid change. Multiple US allies declined a request to send warships to secure the Strait of Hormuz, including Australia, Germany, Greece, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom. That refusal limits the multilateral character of any sustained maritime security effort in the region, placing the operational burden more squarely on US naval assets already committed to the theater. The diplomatic pathway, while narrow, has not closed entirely. Oman, whose diplomats were actively mediating nuclear talks up to the day of the strikes, retains a degree of credibility as a neutral intermediary, paradoxically reinforced by the fact that it was targeted during the conflict despite its mediating role. Qatar, despite having been struck, retains unique experience as a mediator between the US and Iran. Any framework that moves towards stabilization will almost certainly require back-channel engagement through one or both of these intermediaries, combined with the kind of economic pressure that only a major power, most likely China, can bring to bear credibly on Tehran's remaining decision-making structures. The indicators worth watching in the coming days and weeks are specific. First, the status of Hormuz transit, whether commercial shipping resumes in any meaningful volume, and whether insurance markets begin pricing down war risk, will reflect real-time assessments of whether the maritime threat environment is stabilizing. Second, the behavior of Iran's remaining coastal and small vessel assets. Any resumption of harassment or offensive action against commercial traffic would signal continued intent to exercise maritime pressure despite the degradation of larger naval assets. Third, the state of diplomatic backchannels. Any signal from Oman, Qatar, or Chinese intermediaries of resumed contact between Washington and Tehran would indicate movement toward an off-ramp, however preliminary. Fourth, and perhaps most consequential, is whether the internal fracture within Iran's decision-making structures begins to resolve in either direction. If the IRGC and the civilian presidency align around a common posture, whether toward continued engagement or toward negotiation, the strategic picture becomes somewhat clearer. If the fragmentation persists or deepens, the risk of actions that neither Iran's civilian government nor its external interlocutors can predict or control remains elevated. The Shahid Bagheri was a 240-meter statement of intent. Its fate, determined in the opening hours of a campaign that is still unfolding, has already redrawn parts of the regional maritime map. The questions it raises about deterrence, about the limits of asymmetric naval doctrine, about the relationship between military action and diplomatic process, are not resolved by what happened at Bandar Abbas. They are sharpened by it. And the answers, according to current assessments, will not arrive all at once. They will emerge gradually, through the behavior of actors whose options have been significantly narrowed, and through the decisions of those who are now trying to determine what comes next. This report is based on observable developments and strategic analysis, with some details still evolving as events continue to unfold.